Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part thereof for the 8th of September 2025. I'm probably going to do a geopolitical update after this video, even though I did one last night as a live stream. Check that out, it's all completely relevant still and packed full of nuggets for you. I did have to sort of rush through it a bit. I didn't linger at the end, sorry. But I had family to attend to and whatnot, but quite a lot of content to divulge with you today. There's all sorts going on all over the world. I've got one on Angela Rayner resigning as the Deputy Prime Minister in the UK, and one on Reform. I think I'm going to put out Reform UK and their conference, which was pretty astonishing, and all my usual Ukraine stuff. Going to do a frontline update as well if I have time. So okay, let's get on with this. Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. 910 personnel lost is about where we saw it yesterday in the 900s. So that has ticked up from where we have seen it over the past weeks. 5 tanks and 4 troop-carrying AFVs, typically fairly low. 29 artillery systems actually ticking down, even though it's still above the daily average for the course of the war, as I explained the other day. So low, but above average. How does that work? Well, it's low for the last 6 months, 1 year, actually really low for the last 2 years. It was 2022 to 2023 that really skewed the overall war average down. But yeah, 29, still a fair number. 81 vehicles and fuel tanks, below the 100 threshold. I often talk about very high numbers of drones, and that will be half of the night before. Some of last night. Now, the night before saw 810 drones get sent into Ukraine, but those numbers from the day before, so yesterday's numbers, not today's numbers, would have cut off halfway through the night as well. So it kind of skews that. That's half of what you would have seen 2 nights ago. Anyway, so those numbers are somewhat typical. We're going to look at some personnel issues before we get on to some loss lists from Oryx. We're going to go first to Vadim Syrskyi, who is from the Ukrainian Military Intelligence, the GUR or HUR, depending on how it's transcribed. He has said a bunch of things which are summarized here by Visioner that are worthy of note. So, quote, Russia has already used 50 to 75% of the Soviet weapon stockpiles in its warehouses. Of course, that covers a multitude of sins. So, Soviet weapon stockpiles, infantry fighting vehicles, towed howitzers, self-propelled guns, mortars, ammunition stockpiles, small arms, anti-tank gun. What are we talking about? Are there certain areas where they have used up far more or far less? So anyway, I think the implication here is they are churning through their stockpiles. Today, the threat level coming from Belarus is low. North Korea plans to send thousands of workers to Russia, both to military factories and construction sites. So that's interesting. That will ease the labour market shortages and also help with the production of weapons. Bad news for Ukraine there. The occupiers plan to employ 40,000 foreign workers at the Shahed kamikaze drone factory located in Yelabuga. 40,000 workers there. So we had 810 drones the other night. Imagine where that could go if Russia is able to ramp up production to obscene levels. I mean, you're talking thousands of drones every night. So that is target number 1 in my books, Yelabuga and the Shahed drone manufacturing chain, supply chain. North Korean military personnel are still present in Russia, specifically in the Kursk region. Their task is to strengthen the border, so they're using them as border patrol, essentially, border guards. And since the beginning of the year, and this is a pretty staggering number, Russia has recruited 280,000 military personnel under contract. So in 9 months, they've recruited 280,000 people, which would imply that they've lost something like 280,000 people. Yep, the size of the army might have increased a little bit. It might have decreased a little bit. We don't really know. But in order to have recruited 280,000 people, you have the need for that number. I mean, I think it implies staggering losses of the Russians during this last year. And then we have this from Tatarigami, Ukrainian source that will just a small thread we'll go through. So our data show, so he has this organization called Front Intelligence Insight. Our data shows show Russian forces are losing the equivalent of several battalions each month to AWOLs and desertions. This spring and summer incidents doubled and in some cases tripled compared with 2024. The trend shows steady systemic rise in desertions. Full data is out tomorrow. That should be out today at some point. We have detailed data by name, date, unit and district, offering rare insight into the Russian army's internal strains. Yet while media coverage often spotlights Ukraine's AWOL problems, which are real and serious, far less attention is paid to the same issue in Russia. And that is huge. Wow. That is several battalions each month from people going AWOL, absent without leave, and deserting. Absolutely incredible. Now, Playfar goes down to the Stepnohirsk direction, just to let you know where this is. This is the Zaporizhia reservoir, which doesn't look like that. It is actually mainly ground, can be marshy, can be crusty. It's where water used to be, but now not so much. And this is Kupyansk, and this is where the Russians have been pushing up. Actually, further, this isn't Kupyansk. Kupyansk is just south of this, as it comes into this Plavny urban area there. That's north of Kupyansk, and the Russians have been pushing slowly upwards and upwards. And that's a real concern for the Ukrainians, who want to keep the Russians in place so that they don't get closer to the city of Zaporizhia, which is further up this reservoir to the north, and get into striking distance. Now, Playfar says, I think this is just useful for the hits and losses idea of this video. Stepnohirsk direction, Ukrainian assault groups raided Russian positions today after using the FPV wall of fire strategy and cleared out Russian accumulations in Ahana Street. From there, the Russians tried to sneak into Radyanska Street in small groups. The Russians, meanwhile, dig positions in the middle part of Plavny and consolidate there and east of the settlement inside trenches dug by Ukrainian forces behind Kupyansk. The Ukrainian defensive line in Stepnohirsk goes exactly through Radyanska Street and is constituted by residential houses and basements. In general, the Russians often run into northern Plavny and the areas at the southern bank of the small river and try to accumulate there, but Ukrainian mortars, drones and assault groups clear them out often. The Ahana Street episode is just one of them. Ukrainian fire goes up to Kupyansk itself, searching for Russian forces. The dried up Kakhovka reservoir bed is rarely used for any purpose, as it's full of tripwires and mines, and the territory is way too swampy to provide any advantage. According to my information, in the stretch of front from Kupyansk to Stepova, in 60 days since early July, 1,500 Russian infantrymen were eliminated, 200 lightly wounded and 300 targets of other types were destroyed, with a good amount of these having private video confirmation. On the Ukrainian side, instead, after some darker periods, the situation took a turn for the better, and they're now losing very low amounts of both personnel and vehicles. The numbers that I have are so low, both me and my source think are too good to be true, but it looks like it is true indeed. So what it's saying here is the Russians have actually lost tremendous amounts of troops, and although there were some bad patches for the Ukrainians where they were losing quite a few, that has now stopped, and the ratio seems to be insanely good, so good that he doesn't believe it, but he does believe it. Actually, it's so good that it's unbelievable, but he does believe it because it appears to be true through confirmation and through evidence and whatnot. So this is really good news for the Ukrainians. This seems to be the case because of different reasons, such as the fact that their command structure here is a total mess. So the Russians' command structure is a total mess. They have no communication between themselves while assaulting. They assault in waves. Their command is extremely prone to being wasteful with manpower. So, yeah, interesting from Playfar, who's someone that doesn't, is not like totally pro-Ukraine. They are pro-Ukrainian by point of fact that they are Ukrainian, as far as I understand, but they are they tell it how it is. Right? They do not hide when Ukraine is doing things badly. They're very critical of Ukraine's defenses when they're not operating optimally. So that's an interesting data point. Russian mill bloggers have admitted themselves that in Kupyansk, now going right up to the north, soldiers were forced to raise flags for propaganda. Once exposed, the Ukrainian forces identified their positions and struck, leaving many of them dead. So this is something that we've seen over and over again for the Russians, that they just throw people in with flags to try and get a PR win. So the translation here, the boys will still ask about Kupyansk from Yura. He raised hype. The boys were sent flags because of this to show all these boys were killed, to show off all these boys were killed. Yes, there is control to the south where the boys were sent. There is a grey area. That's where they were killed. So in other words, going to put flags in the grey area, getting killed by Ukrainians, but claiming that the grey area is then controlled by the Russians. I'll tell you one more thing. The boys don't walk the streets. They were forced to come out and show their flags. The Ukrainians copied the spots where they were sitting and covered them up. In other words, they geolocated where the flags were and killed them. Right, so then now we're going to go to Pokrovsk, where, again, actually good news for the Ukrainians. Go and watch Scruffy Tales' video. It's really good this morning, and good news, and also looks pretty well evidenced. Now, he's talking about, there's this idea that I spoke about yesterday that actually this all could have been a ruse by the Ukrainians to invite the Russians in and then take them into kill zones and take them out, because where the Russians got through, there are actually no significant Ukrainian trench lines. So it could be the Russians just found the weakest spots. Or why would the Ukrainians build up massive networks of trenches but leave these weird gaps right in the middle of them? And the weird gaps are where the Russians came up, and then they used those gaps to create 3 circles of kill zones. So if this is a bit of a frontline kind of update thing, but it's not really. Oh dear, it didn't like doing that. It doesn't like me drawing on this. That's a shame. So you've got one kill zone up here, and you've got one pocket here, and you've got one pocket here, right? And actually the Ukrainians have surrounded here, so they've cut them off here. They've done these counterattacks up there, counterattacks here, counterattacks actually across here as well, and they're pushing from the north here from Shakova downwards, and up here from Eknomenchina. Anyway, because I've not got it written, my brain has just gone nuts. Anyway, they're pushing up from there. So they're trying to cut off the Russians into 3 pockets where they are just therefore taking them out, and they don't have the trench lines to defend themselves in, because these are where the Ukrainians haven't built trenches, right? Weirdly, or not weirdly, because it could well be purposeful. And then the Russians with 155th Naval Infantry Brigade and other units are trying to throw their forces into here to reconnect where they've been cut off in potentially several areas, and they are just throwing their troops into these kill zones where the Ukrainians are able from both sides to hammer them with drones, with artillery and all sorts. So there were claims yesterday that the Ukrainians had a 5 to drone to 1 person advantage. That was coming from a Russian source. It's like for every 1 person we got 5 drones hitting us. So this is potentially really good news for the Ukrainians. There's been lots of talk about the Russians mounting a massive attack in this area, but it could be that they're bringing extra troops here because they're in trouble, because the Ukrainians have done a really successful set of counterattacks. So anyway, that's something I'm going to be talking about in a frontline update. But independent Ukrainian experts report the formation of encirclement within a narrow bottleneck of the area of the settlements of Novotoretska, Ranino, and Fedorivka. Potentially, obviously, this area, the bunny ears, there were 2, but one's been sort of taken out. Potentially this area and potentially that area as well. Okay. Then we go on to listen, and this is relevant to the Pokrovsk area, to the Commander-in-Chief, General Syrskyi, who said that Ukrainian forces regained 5 times more territory than they lost in August. So this was actually something that a few people had predicted. Was it Tatargami? Was it Playfra? Or I can't remember who it was, saying actually you might have a situation where Ukraine gains land in August rather than loses it, because month on month they just consistently lose land, but they are swapping land for attrition of Russian troops and for time, etc., etc. So it's a calculation they're willing to make at the moment. But August could be a month where they actually took more land than they lost. Here, Syrskyi is claiming 5 times more. On the Pokrovsk front alone, where Russia concentrated its main efforts, around 350 attacks were repelled last week. In August, while losing 5 square kilometers, Ukraine regained 26 square kilometers. Similar results were achieved near Zaporizhia. So that is pretty incredible, if indeed true. Now, here we have Syrskyi, so his full comments here. They regained 58 square kilometer in August. Ukraine's defense forces regained 58 square kilometers, that's in total, and liberated several settlements, because the other one was in the Zaporizhia area. 26 square kilometers. So 58 square kilometers. That's going to include Sumy in particular. He added that the enemy holds a threefold advantage in manpower and equipment, and in the key areas may outnumber Ukrainian troops 4 or 6 times. So it's, yeah, okay, the Ukrainians are doing a really good job, but under incredibly stressful circumstances where they are sometimes 4 to 6 times outnumbered. Currently, the enemy has a threefold advantage in forces and means, and in the main concentration areas of their efforts, they may outnumber us 4 to 6 times. However, I express deep gratitude to our officers, sergeants, and especially soldiers. Their professional skills, resilience, dedication, courage are breaking the plans of the Russian occupiers. So you can go and read the full amount of what he says here. And I'm just moving it on to the next 2 pages. That one, the enemy uses a creeping advanced tactic with small infantry groups trying to infiltrate populated areas. So this is up in the so the defense forces prevented territorial losses in the Heliopole area and the Pokrovsk direction. So that's down on the Zaporizhia front, and then the North Syrskyi direction, so that's up in the Sumy front. They also captured 4 square kilometers. So they're using these creeping advanced tactics, trying to infiltrate populated areas by exploiting the interpositional space and avoiding direct contact or combat. So during August, control was restored over 58 square kilometers of territory, and a number of settlements were liberated. So then there's some more stats here. Overall, our drones struck 67,000 enemy objects last month, and the effectiveness of strikes under the middle strike program increased by 25%. So his claim, that's a huge amount. That's a huge improvement. 25% improvement in 1 month. For effectiveness. Like if you're in a business, you'd be like, oh, we've improved our output, we've improved our efficiency by like 4.7% last month. You'd be like, well done, you can have a raise. That's excellent. 25% is an insanely good improvement of drone strike effectiveness. So that's really good news, again, if true. In August alone, the occupiers' personnel losses amounted to 28,790 people. And they'll be needing to recruit at a level of 30,000 plus to be able to replace those, of course. And since the beginning of 2025, 297,350 Russian invaders have been killed or wounded. So casualties are approaching almost 300,000 since the beginning of this year. That's absolutely staggering. So now we are on to equipment losses from Oryx. We have 23 Russian losses since the last update, and 10 Ukrainian losses. Ukrainian losses, single tank, M113, PBV 302. That's the no, it's not the articulated. It's the infantry fighting vehicle that has come from the Swedes. Went obsolete in 2014. The Kirpi, that's a Turkish MRAP. You got a Senator MRAP, a Novator. That's a Ukrainian-made Senator's Canadian. And then you've got just some other mobility vehicles, so nothing too serious at all. Russians losing 4 tanks there, a bunch of AFVs, BMP 1s and 2s, BTRs, and then quite a lot of artillery, including 2 multiple launch rocket systems there. And then we've got a transporter erector launcher and radar for the Book 1M2 destroyed. That's obviously very high value. So that one thing alone will be the same value probably or more than everything on the Ukrainian list. So the Russians having a worse time of it according to Oryx. And I'll just highlight what Euromaidan Press is saying in reporting what Reporting from Ukraine has done in one of their latest videos. Only because it's exactly what I've been talking about for the last week plus, and really for the last few months. Ukraine erases Russia's radar systems in occupied Crimea and brings Bayraktars back into the battlefield. From destroyed boats to smart bombs made in Ukraine, the drones are once again reshaping the Black Sea front. So Crimea is definitely on the agenda at the moment. Where's that going? Is that in order to get close air support from Ukrainian air, as some people have suggested, as I've said, must be one of the outcomes that they're looking for there. Right, going to some equipment that's been destroyed. A joint operation by Ukraine's military intelligence and Omega special forces destroyed key Russian air defense assets. So this is a strike eliminating a 9S-18 Kupol radar, a launch and loader vehicle for the Buk system, and an additional Buk system. So again, you know, this degradation of Russian air defenses. I don't know where that was though, but as someone says, another one. Air defense is going to become very scarce soon. It's Buk hunting season. So this just feeds into what we're just hearing from the Euromaidan press, what I've been saying for the last however long. Now, big explosion in occupied Horlivka. Don't know what was destroyed there, but something big has gone up. And then we have just one more thing. Ukrainian Patriot Group Atesh showing that they are still operating in destroying Russian relay cabinets. Or this is actually a comms tower in Tula. So this is deep into Russia. And then showing the Atesh sheet of paper there to signify that, yeah, this is the result of Ukrainian partisans or pro-Ukrainian partisans within Russia. So it's almost impossible to verify, but the claim is that that is a comms tower in Tula. Right, now we're going to go to distant strikes, and Russia last night sent 142 drones into Ukraine, no missiles. So I think that's significant, no missiles. You would if you could, you answer you can't. So I think that there are claims of trying to ramp up missile production, but it's certainly not like it was, I think, at the beginning of the war. Drones, on the other hand, that's a very different kettle of fish, and they are using drones plentifully at the moment. Although, you know, after that 810 drone night, I don't think they can do that consecutively quite yet, but 142 is a lot of drones to deal with, and 112 being intercepted means that you got 112 things falling down and blowing up or causing damage. Not all of them will be loaded with warheads, remember, but 30 of them getting through, and that's going to cause some issue. 30 drones getting through is a challenge, right? So another drone has crashed in Poland after one crashed on Saturday night into Sunday. So yeah, from yesterday's update, another drone crashes in Lublin Voivodeship in eastern Poland. We hear from the Poles that it was with a drone with Cyrillic markings, so almost certainly Russian, and it's crashed in Poland near the Belarus border. We're hearing quite a few drones are coming across the Belarus border at the moment as well. It's worth noting. Quote, the drone is unarmed and there are Cyrillic inscriptions on it, according to Agnieszka Kepka, spokesperson for the prosecutor's office locally there in Lublin. So some Russian drones are creeping across the border into Poland. Is Poland shooting them down? Those two that fell, were they shot down? I don't know. Ukraine was under attack from 142 drones, as we know. Air defense intercepted 112, but most damage occurred in Kiev and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts, where industrial facilities and residential and administrative buildings were hit. But I don't have too much detail. What I am going to suggest, and this was kind of brought up by Perun in his video yesterday, and I have been saying this, but I need to just make sure that it's more explicitly understood, that when the Russians have nights like this, where they are sending 142 drones in and 30 get through, or when 810 was sent in and however many got through, and particularly when we don't see widespread pictures of residential buildings getting blown up. So I said, was it maybe 4 nights ago or something, and there was, I don't know, however many, like 100 odd drones sent in, and you got the stats, and there were no pictures. No pictures came out. And if no pictures came out, that to me means that the Ukrainians hit military targets. So I know it's easy for us to want Russia to always be kind of uselessly and war criminally striking at civilian targets. So we can get our perception skewed that the Russians are just inept or evil, maybe, and or evil. But actually, they are hitting Ukrainian military industrial complex targets on a regular basis, and this is why some claim that Ukraine's ballistic missile output has been so freaking long in the tooth. Right, where your ballistic missiles, you've had 3.5 years to make it. Well, there are claims that actually they have been making them, and the factories keep getting blown up. And you don't hear about that because that's like, and 25 drones fell in 6 different districts, and that's all you know. well, actually, they are hitting routinely military targets as well. And so I think Ukraine's, so for example, like over the last week or two, like we saw loads of drones hitting Russian refineries and depots, and August was a really good month for Ukraine, particularly earlier on. But since then, the last 8 days in September, we've seen relatively little. So what's going on there? I haven't seen any Lyuty drones. We used to see footage of Lyuty drones be used routinely, and I haven't seen too much of that recently. So my guess is that the Ukraine might well have had their drone manufacturing struck themselves. We talk about Yelabuga. I talk about Yelabuga being #1 target. But for the Russians, they're going to be targeting the hell out of Ukraine's military-industrial complex and striking where they make their weapons, their long-range drones, and their missiles. So I personally think the Ukrainians had intentions of making 100 FP1s a day and all these Lyutys and FP5s, but the Russians are going to be actively every single night working against that. So when we don't see large-scale drone and missile attacks, it's probably going to be down to you would if you could, you answer, you can't, why can't you? Because actually you made these big claims about production and then Russia hit your production. So I just think the Russians have been much more successful at hitting Ukraine's military-industrial complex than they let on, than the Ukrainians let on, of course. You know, they're very good at OPSEC. But those days where you see very few bits of footage coming out, last night could be one of them, right? Very little footage coming out of, I mean, this is basically it, give or take. And that's 30 drones getting through. Where have those 30 drones hit? Because this looks like maybe a couple of drones tops. You know, where are the other 25 drones? So I'm guessing that every night there are military targets and air bases that are getting absolutely rinsed, or at least the Russians are attempting to. And I'm fairly sure they are having their success. And Perun talked about that a little bit in his video as well last night in terms of, you know, production numbers of Ukrainian kit. So he did a whole video on the Flamingo, and it's well worth watching. Remarkably, the bridge in Kremenchuk, so the bridge in Kremenchuk for a Ukrainian bridge, was struck by a drone, and it was a pretty big explosion, but it reopened just hours after the strike. Council's been providing free buses over the dam to help residents across the city, but that's pretty impressive. The Ukrainians are very good at getting these things fixed as quickly as they can. In the Poltava region, road traffic across the bridge damaged by the Russian drone strike was restored within a day. The Ukrainian railway head reported. I don't know about the railway. Is there a railway part to this bridge as well? Sometimes it's underneath. But yeah, I don't know why that's ahead of the railway saying that. Maybe it used to be a railway bridge. Who knows? Okay. So then on to what the Ukrainians did last night. And all we really know about is a massive explosion by the looks of it in Makivka. That's occupied Donetsk. It joins the city of Donetsk. Russian-controlled media report a big drone attack in the occupied city there. Officials in Donetsk itself say 4 civilians have been injured, including a child, after strikes on Gulliver Park in the city. What I find strange, says Tim White about this video, on the state news agency is that we see people running but no siren, and then with no explosions, a cut to blood. So yeah, don't seem to be alerting the population to whatever was striking. Makes you wonder what struck. Was it a missile? Was it a ballistic missile that got there pretty quickly? Ukraine also blew up the second gas station, second petrol station in Klimovo in Bryansk region, just over the border. And this, second time in as many days almost, I think, with these sort of strikes in Bryansk. Still no end to the Russian woes, says Tim White yesterday in Klimovo. Ukraine's drones hit a substation. Today they sought out this Rosneft depot in the same town in Bryansk, in the Bryansk region. There's a still from this attack in case you doubted it. So there it is, and Rosneft written on there. In case you doubted it really was a Rosneft oil facility. And then the good people of Bryansk could soon smell more fumes, and a second fuel storage facility in Klimovo was hit by Ukraine drones. So repeated attacks in Bryansk there in the same kind of area. And just going back to Ukraine and the 810 drones that struck the other night and then hit the government building in Kiev. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, Foreign Minister, said that heads of 60 diplomatic missions received a briefing with a focus not on the government building itself, but on the destruction and deaths caused by the recent massive Russian attack across all of Ukraine. So taking these people from diplomatic missions around from within Kiev and taking them to these places to talk about, you know, who bears the brunt of these Russian attacks. It's not about a government building getting hit, but it's about people dying. So, you know, a pregnant woman was seriously injured and her baby had to be induced early, and they're both like on life support. You had a 2-month-old child dying in this. You had a young 29-year-old woman dying in those attacks. It's just horrific stuff as ever from the Russians. But remember that alongside those horrific attacks, they will be striking at military facilities and hitting them, or military industrial facilities. Now, harsh realities of occupied Donetsk due to the lack of water. We've heard about this. Now it's raining here. Someone is washing their hair in a puddle in Donetsk, according to this picture, this video from Max25. That apparently is giving an indication of how desperate things are in that city. Now, Shashank Joshi here, referring to the think tank Chatham House, a balanced assessment of Russia's economy, quote, from their report, full year real GDP growth forecasts are being revised down to less than 1% for 2025, but inflation expectations remain elevated. There is no end in sight for the current stagflationary macro situation. So stagflation is where your growth is down, but inflation goes up. And usually inflation goes up when everyone's got loads of money. You're buying more things and the price of things goes up. You maybe get a wage price spiral. But stagflation is like, yeah, we don't have the we don't have the economic growth, but we do have inflation, and that is like a double whammy. So people losing their jobs and stuff getting more expensive. These are aggregate indicators, though, and with the war economy being prioritized, there's much to suggest that other non-priority sectors are struggling under the burden of high interest costs and debt. So we've heard that farmers are really struggling because they can't get loans to buy more machinery. Machinery is becoming more expensive. Labour is scarce, and so therefore you have a wage inflation as you're competing to get workers. There's underfunding of all the different sectors: education, healthcare, etc., etc. Welfare is no doubt getting hit, and yeah, it's not looking good for Russia economically. Now, all of Russia's largest oil companies reported a collapse in profits for the first half of 2025, according to the Moscow Times. I have kind of gone through these before, but there are some more stats here. If you're interested in the stats, you've got Rosneft. So profit down threefold, revenue down 18%, capital expenditures up 11%, EBITDA, I don't know what it is, but that's down 36%. I'm sure that's not good. So yeah, Lukoil, profit halved, revenue down 70%, EBITDA down 1.6 times. We have Gazprom Neft, profit decreased by 54.2%, revenue down 12%, EBITDA down 27.6%, and Syrskyi Neftgaz lost 452.7 billion rubles. That's very careless. Look down the back of the sofa. And that's around about 5.57 billion in 6 months and turned unprofitable. Tatneft profit plunged nearly threefold. Rosneft profit fell 3.2 times. It's not looking good, is it? And then, according to Rosneft, Russia's oil and gas sector lost 50.4% of its profits. 45% of companies ended the half year with a loss. So almost half the companies now losing money. In Khanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug, which accounts for 40% of Russia's oil production, the oil industry became unprofitable. What are the reasons? Increased global oil production. Rosneft CEO Igor Sechin, so we're going to talk about this in a second, explained the decline in profits by noting OPEC countries significantly ramped up production, lowering global oil prices. Quote, comments by the head of Russia's largest oil producer, longtime ally of Putin, marked the first expression of months of Russian concern over OPEC Plus's strategy of accelerating output growth, Reuters noted. Then you had falling oil prices as a result of that, barrel of euros. Crude costs almost $70 at the beginning of the year, but only 59.8 in June. In ruble terms, prices fell nearly 30% in 6 months. Wow. Tightening sanctions against Russia's oil sector, the G7 embargo, sanctions on shipping and logistics, crackdown on the shadow fleet, technology bans, financial restrictions, and the inability to settle in dollars. The threat of secondary sanctions, apart from Asian countries, which account for over 80% of Russia's exports. Almost no one is buying Russian crude oil. Analysts estimate the Russian oil exports to China fell 11% in volume and 24% in value in the first half of the year. Why does this matter? Oil and gas revenues are the Kremlin's most important source of funds, providing every third ruble. So 33%, like a third of Russia's income comes from oil and gas. Putin does not use his money to improve the lives of Russians, repair roads and utilities, build housing, kindergartens and hospitals, uses it for the war. In 2025, Russia increased national defense spending by a quarter to 6.3%. So increased expenditure on the war. So increased expenditure, you could argue, because unless they're like robbing Peter to pay Paul. But if you're getting decreased income, like either way, that is hurting. In 2025, Russia increased national defense spending by a quarter to 6.3% of GDP. Defense now accounts for 32% of the federal budget's total expenditure. For 2025, the fewer oil and gas revenues Russia collects, the weaker its ability will be to kill Ukrainians and threaten the world. Now, going to OPEC, I'm hearing contradictory things. OPEC Plus has decided to increase production by 137,000 barrels per day in October, which is very, very bad news for Russia, because Russia are part of OPEC Plus and they're all having to produce more oil, but then that brings the price of oil down, which means you're getting less per barrel. But then oil prices rose after OPEC Plus agreed over the weekend to slow output increases from October on expectations of weaker global demand, according to Reuters. So they might have said we're going to produce more, and then I don't know if they changed mind on that. So actually we're going to slow the output increases because there's weaker demand around the world, and there could be weaker demand because the US has started a trade war with everyone, and that's going to affect everyone's economy. And the first thing, the big indicator of like economic health is energy demand. So Brent crude rose 34 cents to 0.5% to 65.84 a barrel. So it's actually going up. And West Texas Intermediate crude rose 30 cents, or again 0.5% to $62.17 a barrel. So actually both indexes moving in the wrong direction, but they fell more than 2% on Friday as a weak US jobs report dampened expectations for energy demand, and they lost more than 3% last week. So, the general trend appears to be going downwards, which is good for us in terms of Russia not making much money, or as much money. The 8 OPEC Plus members will increase output by 137 barrels per day from October. So some mixed messages, but if they go for 137,000 barrels per day, that is going to depress the prices, and that's the intention, but it wouldn't be the intention of Russia. They're going to be unhappy with that. Now, the impact of the strikes on Russia and their oil refineries is that, one, they're not exporting refined products, and two, all gas stations have been completely out of gasoline for 3 days in the Syrskyi district in Nizhny Novgorod region. Residents are having to travel to neighboring cities to fill up their cars and fuel canisters. And so this goes on in many places around the country. Local news in Syrskyi, capital of Moldova, with 300,000 population, presented the fuel crisis as a great mystery, offering no coherent explanation. Oh, I wonder why this is happening, as they question publicly. I don't know why this is happening. Now, if you remember all the controversy about the government wanting more oversight into the corruption investigations and investigatory entities like NABU, and this caused a law. Well, it was a law change that caused a ruckus, and then there were loads of protests on the street, and then they kind of reversed some of the law change or changed it a bit, and everyone seems to be somewhat more happy with the situation. But the government's claim was that there were moles in NABU that were pro-Russian, and they needed more oversight in order to kind of stop Russian influence. And the claims from the SBU now, the SPU, are that they're giving details of the detention of a mole in the NABU in July from the SBU. The detainee was a member of the FSB, so the Russian Secret Service, and gave Yanukovych's former bodyguard more than 60 episodes of restricted information. So Yanukovych, obviously the former Ukrainian leader that ran off to Russia after the Euromaidan protests, his former bodyguard received 60 episodes of restricted information from this mole. He faces up to 15 years in prison for high treason. The network also included SPU Major General Valery Shaitanov, who's been sentenced to 12 years, Dmitro Ivantsov, Yanukovych's former bodyguard hiding in Crimea, and a National Guard serviceman. So this is serious stuff, and there were evidently, if this is all true, which one must think it is, genuine worries for the Ukrainian government. Did that justify what they did? I don't know, but that's I guess, somewhat their side of the story. Now, something and finally, my final nugget for you: Russians won't like this. Scientists have found the homeland of the Slavs. So these are your sort of cultural genetic peoples of this region. Russia, they like to lean on their Slavic heritage. But unfortunately for Russia, it turns out the homeland of the Slavs is Kiev area. So geneticists determined the location by comparing DNA from ancient burials. So the ancestors of the Slavs lived in northern Ukraine and southern Belarus in the area of Kiev archaeological culture, 2nd to 5th century CE. The study was published in the journal Nature. Mass migration began in the 6th to 8th centuries, when up to 80 to 90% of the local population of Central Europe was replaced by people of these lands. Unlike the Germans or Celts, the Slavs remained in place for a long time and only later began a rapid expansion of their range. Researchers established that this migration was not only cultural, it was a demographic explosion. Today, the highest concentration of Slavic genes is observed in Ukraine, Belarus and Poland, gradually decreasing to the south and east. It turns out that Kiev is not only the mother of Russian cities, of course it predates all these Russian cities, not that it is a Russian city, but they like to say that the kind of Muscovy is Russia and Ukraine is subservient to Muscovy type thing. And of course, history tells another story. But also the mother of Slavic peoples. The homeland of the Slavs at the beginning of our era was located in the area marked in orange. This territory is now in the Kiev region. So that's interesting. I just thought I'd hit you with that. Please don't forget to go to Car for Ukraine. And hopefully the link will be in the description below. I don't think I added it to my live yesterday. Please go and check that out. We are wowzeroonies. No, that's a summer one. Oh, I've got confused. My goodness. Okay, we've just suddenly raised 10,000 overnight. No, we haven't. That's our previous campaign. So if we go to the autumn harvest, please go to the autumn harvest, go to ATP Geopolitics, and look, we're at just over 3,300 euros. Right, that's why I was heart in the mouth. But yeah, please help us out to get to that level. We are trying to raise money for 2 trucks, and you can check out the donor wall. I'll leave that on the screen for you. Thank you very much to all those who have just so generously contributed to this wonderful campaign. Thanks to Keith Meredith, Garv Yearsley, and Gary Yearsley, sorry, not Garv, Christopher Cardale, Alex Grammersdorf, and all you other wonderful people, Anthony Turner and Nigel Miller, and Yuri Krauls, Millington, John Corbett, Joe PK. That's since I last, and all the anonymous people since I last updated. So thanks so much. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.